Okay, hi everybody. Good evening. We are on our fifth class of Nature and the Land of Israel. Um, like all our classes in this current cycle, we are going to dedicate our learning to the swift return of the hostages, to the refuah shlema of everybody who has been injured, and to the safe return of our soldiers, of all our soldiers. Thank you for learning with us. Okay, so today we are going to talk about animals. And the truth is that I have to say I was sloppy. And when I wrote the titles of the classes, I wrote the lion and the lamb, which is, comes from the phrase in English, right? About March winds come in like a lion, go out like a lamb. But really, the pasuk in Tanakh is not a lion and a lamb, but it's a wolf and a lamb. Begar ze'ev im keves, right? And later on, we have the lion and the egel and the calf. So I corrected it here, just to remind us of the old Woody Allen joke when he used to still be funny, right? That the lion and the lamb might lie down together, but the lamb isn't going to get much sleep. But we are going to talk about animals in the land of Israel, particularly how we see them in Tanakh, in Halacha, in ancient art, so many different references. I love this picture, which is on the Wikipedia page for animals of the land of Israel, because it gives you a sense of the enormous diversity of animal life that we have in Eretz Yisrael. Same thing, by the way, with plant life, because we are at this meeting of continents. We have a meeting of 4 out of 6 what are called phytogeographic areas. There are 6 of them in the world. We have 4 of them in the land of Israel. So you really have this enormous diversity of animal life. Just to give you a few numbers, we have today, right? We're not talking about extinct, but today we have 100 species of mammals, 100 species of reptiles, 1,700 species of fish, 500 of birds, and 30,000 of invertebrates. So really incredible range and diversity of animals. We're going to talk about some of the explorers who started to see that range and to discover it. Yeah, it is a beautiful picture. And we want to talk, we're going to talk a little less about natural history, some, but we're also going to talk about Tanakh and Torah Shebaal Peh. What animals were they familiar with? How did they use them in metaphor, in halacha, and even in teaching ethics, right? Chazal talk about what we can learn from animals, right? Cats are supposed to be modest and roosters are supposed to be promiscuous, right? There's certain animals you should emulate. There's certain animals you should not emulate. So that's also just a fascinating thing. So we have many things to discuss. So let us get started. We're going to come back to some of the animals that are in this picture, so do not fear. The natural history of Eretz Yisrael, you could see it in what Tanakh writes about or the Mishnah writes about, but really because, and we'll get back to this a little bit later, because most Jews were separated from the land for so long, there really was a lack of understanding and identification of certain species, and there certainly was a lack of a comprehensive mapping of all the different species of the land of Israel. So in the 19th and the 20th century, we start to have explorers who come, largely Christians. Later on, we're going to have Jews who come and who start to kind of map out the various species as well as the geography of Eretz Israel, which also was something that needed to be mapped out. One of these early explorers is somebody named Henry Baker Tristram, and he's a very interesting fellow. Like a lot of these early explorers, he is a British Christian. He was actually a very devout. He was a minister, but he wasn't particularly interested in staying home and being a minister. And he wasn't even interested in being a minister in Israel. He was actually offered the position of being head of Christ Church in Jerusalem. And he said, no, he'd rather be a naturalist. And he traveled around. He actually traveled all over the world, which is rather astounding considering the time that he lived in. But his greatest passion was the land of Israel. And he traveled with an entourage. He came with artists and photographers and a doctor and porters and guards. And he traveled the length and the breadth of the land. And every time he took a journey, he came home and he wrote a book, usually with a lot of illustrations. And he helped to found the Palestine Exploration Society in 1865, devoted to exploring the geography and the topography and the natural history of the land of Israel. And his magnum opus is a book called The Fauna and the Flora of Palestine. And it really was the first work of its kind. He discovered many up until then unknown species, and he has species that are named after him. Probably the most famous one is this cute little bird here, which if you go to Masada or other places near the Dead Sea, but you see them particularly lots of them in Masada, you'll see this bird. It's called, in Hebrew, it's called a tristramite. In English, it's called Tristram starling. And it's a very charming little bird that's actually at Masada has become completely tame and comes and eats, from your hand. But he was the first one to identify it and to describe it. And so it got named after him, along with a species of lizard. And he has a few other things that are named after him. A different kind of explorer is somebody named Father Ernst Schmitz, excuse me. He's going to be in a school called the Schmidt School, but his name is Schmitz. He's the bearded gentleman in the middle here. He was a Catholic father, German Catholic, and he was a naturalist already in Germany. He was interested in natural history, came to the land of Israel not to be a naturalist. He came here to head up one of the schools in the German Catholic school system here, what's called the Schmidt Girls School. We'll see a picture of the building that it's in a minute. But along the way, he decided to indulge his passion for flora and fauna. Now, how that was done, often, Tristram didn't do this, but Schmitz definitely did. How this was done in the late 19th, early 20th century was that you traveled around looking for animals, you shot them, and you stuffed them, right? Today, we say, well, how could you do that? You're supposed to be preserving the extinct animals. He was preserving them to a certain extent. And if it wasn't for him, we probably wouldn't know about a lot of these animals, because really just the last one would have died somewhere in the wilderness. So at least here we have specimens of them. But yes, it is rather disturbing to modern ears. But he really went and he collected this huge range of animals. He arranged for them to be taxidermied, and he put them in a collection. Now, what's really very, very strange and interesting is that this collection disappeared for years. People knew about it. He wrote about it, but nobody knew where it was. Okay, now you're seeing it and it's very beautiful, and I'll explain to you why it's displayed this way in a minute. But in the 1970s, there was a man named Yossi Leshem, still around. He's one of the founders of the Society for the Protection of Nature in Israel. He's a big bird guy. And he had heard about this and he was fascinated by it, but he didn't know where it was. And one day in the 70s, somebody said to him, let's go and explore this amazing building. This building that you're seeing here on the left is right across the road from Shar Shechem, from Damascus Gate in Jerusalem. It's a building that today is called Paulus House. It originally was called the Schmidt School because it was founded to be this girls' school, like we said, German Catholic girls' school founded by a Father Schmidt. They bought this property, built this fantastic building. It's really a fantastic building. And this is where Schmitz eventually comes to be the headmaster. But nobody had looked for this collection there. And Yossi Leshem was invited to come see the building. And they go down to the basement and they discover the collection there. It's dusty, it's moldy, it's falling apart. And somehow they managed to convince the fathers to let them take it, rehabilitate it, and give it on loan to the fabulous building that you see here on the right. This is the Steinhardt Museum of Natural History in Tel Aviv, on the campus of Tel Aviv University. It's an amazing museum, really, really beautiful. It's meant to look like a Noah's Ark. And it's got all kinds of great exhibits, but on one of the top floors, it has this display in the middle here, this is the display in the Natural History Museum. This is how it was displayed in Schmidt School. But it has this display showing Schmitz being one of the first naturalists, and it's really a very interesting thing to see alongside the more modern methods that we have today of keeping dying populations alive. So that is Father Schmitz. Finally, we have this gentleman, Aaron Shulov. If you've ever gone to the zoo in Jerusalem, you may have noticed, or Waze may have told you, that the zoo is on Rehov Aaron Shulov. Why? Because Aaron Shulov was the founder of the zoo. Okay? Aaron Shulov was an entomologist at Hebrew University. He was also a rather unusual fellow. He and his wife Yocheved, who you can see here with a python, I don't know the python's name, lived in Rehavia. They actually lived in these very beautiful complex of workers' housing, which still exists on Rehov Lazarov. And against all the rules, they kept all sorts of animals in their apartment, including a baby chimpanzee who wore diapers, and they fed with a bottle. And at some point, he decided that he was going to create a zoo of all the animals of Tanakh. Okay? The zoo was first on Rehov Harav Kook. That's what you see up here on the right. Then it was moved to the Hebrew University campus on Mount Scopus. In 1948, when the university has to leave and Mount Scopus becomes a military zone, the zoo is moved there. He's helped by the UN to move the zoo. It's moved to a location in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Romema. And old timers among us may remember actually going to visit that zoo. It was rather strange and run down. It was there till the late 80s, early 90s. At which point Teddy Kollek got a large amount of money from the Tisch family and built what is today the really, really beautiful biblical zoo that's at the edge, the southern edge of Jerusalem by Malcha, and that's the picture that you see here on the bottom. But it starts out with Aaron and Yocheved Shulov and their little kind of homemade zoo. So these are our pioneers of natural history. Let's get into a little bit of animals. So when we read Tanakh, okay, and we don't even have to read Tanakh. We can look at Mishnah. We can look at historians from the Middle Ages up until even the mid-19th century. There are all kinds of animals that used to live in the land of Israel that no longer live here today. We're going to highlight two of them, the bears and lions, but there are more. Okay, there were hippopotamus that lived here. There were water buffalo that have been brought back. All different kinds of animals, crocodiles. Why are they not here anymore? Partly because some of them were hunted, right? Basically hunted out of existence. Some of them, and also in addition to that, they lost their habitats, right? As more and more forests are cut down, cities are built, farms were built, there were fewer places for these wild animals to live. And so they don't exist in the land of Israel anymore. The bear, okay, we have all kinds of bears. The bear that is in the land of Israel is called the Syrian brown bear. Today we have them in the zoo. That's it. And that's what you see here on the right. On the left, you have one of the last bears that was in the land of Israel. It was actually shot by another naturalist named Yisrael Aharoni in 1917. There were a few other sightings here and there, but this is considered to be the last official bear that was found in the land of Israel. But bears in the time of Tanakh, I wouldn't say they were everywhere, but you certainly could encounter a bear. Okay? Now we hear about real bears. Okay, King David, before he's a king, when he wants to go out to battle against Goliath, okay, he goes to Saul and he says to him, "I'm ready, right? I'm your guy." And Saul looks at him. And he's like, "You really? Come on." You're a little pipsqueak. You're nothing. You can't do this. And he says, "Ro'eh avdecha," right? I'm a shepherd. And when a lion or a bear would come and threaten my flock, I was able to save my animals and to chase them away, right? And then he goes on, he doesn't ascribe this to his own strength or bravery. He says, Hashem asher hetzilani me'adov me'aryeh, right? God who saved me from the lion and the bear, he'll also save me from Goliath. So we have this threat of the bear. Okay, we also have a story in Malachim, in Sefer Malachim, about Elisha and bears that come out of the forest to attack children, despite the fact that the Gemara says lo dubim v'lo ya'ar, which became a Hebrew expression. There was no bears, there was no forest, it was all a metaphor, but it's not so implausible that there could have been a bear coming out of the forest. And here in Sefer Shmuel, we have a bear used as a metaphor, right? It's a very strong metaphor when King David has to run away from his son Avshalom, from the rebel Avshalom, okay? And then Avshalom seeks advice from two people, from Achitophel, who gives him good advice, which he doesn't take, and from Hushai Ha'arki, who's a double agent, who's really on David's side. Right? This is what Hushai Ha'arki says to him. Vayomer Hushai, Ata yadata et avicha ve'et anashav ki giborim hema umari nefesh hema kidov shakul basadeh. You know, Hushai continued, your father and his men are courageous fighters. They are as desperate as a bear in the wild, right? Kedov shakul basadeh, a mother bear who's lost her cubs, and he's going to be so angry and he's going to snap back and he's going to be so fierce. You don't want to attack him now. Give him time to cool off, okay? Which is exactly what David needs. He needs time in order to gather his forces. So it was actually very bad advice that Hushai gave, which was good for David and bad for Avshalom. But here we have our bear, a dov shakul basadeh. Another animal that we have so many places in Tanakh is the lion, okay? Lion metaphors, real lions. We got lions all over the place, right? So the lion that we have in the land of Israel is called an Asiatic lion, and that's what you see here. We hear about them up until the 16th century, right? But essentially they are hunted to extinction, right? But they clearly were around before that. They are in so many places in Tanakh. And in fact, their prevalence in Eretz Yisrael is attested by the fact that Tanakh has no fewer than 6 different names for a lion. Okay, we have, I would quiz you, but I'm not going to. Okay, we have obviously an Aryeh, Lavi, a Kfir, Laish, Shachal, and Gur. Okay, some of them might mean a young lion, some of them an older lion, or they could be just poetic names, different names, right? But we hear about them. Think about Bil'am, right? Am kilavi yakum uke'ari yitnaseh, right? The lion is considered to be the king of the animals. The lion, the ox, and the eagle are presented by the Navi Chezkel as the top, right? The top of all the animals. And that's why lions appear everywhere, right? As symbols of Am Yisrael. As symbols of power, right? So take a look at this mosaic up here. This is a copy of the mosaic in Ma'on in the Negev, where you had these lions flanking the menorah. The lion is a symbol for not one, but 2 Shvatim, right? One everybody knows, and that's Yehuda, right? But he's also the symbol of Dan, right? Dan Guraye Yizanek min Habashan. Dan is also a lion, and it's not coincidence that the 2 people in Tanakh who fight lions come from Dan and from Yehuda, respectively. Okay, Shimshon is the first one. And that's the pasuk that I brought you here. Shimshon goes down to Timnah with his parents to meet his bride. They take 2 different paths. His parents don't see this. And a lion comes roaring at him and he rips the lion apart, right? And then he comes back a few months later and there's bees and a hive inside the lion. And that's where he comes up with his great riddle, Me'az yatsa matok. So Shimshon fights the lion. And David, right, as we heard before, David says he fights lions as well. Okay, so it's a symbol of the Shvatim, who are both very important and very powerful Shvatim. And lions became a symbol all over Tanakh, right? So I brought you two things here. We'll look at the second one first. This is not in Tanakh. This is in Avot, and it was immortalized by being put at the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch. Yehuda ben Tema said, "Be strong as a leopard, as kinamer." Swift as an eagle, fleet as a gazelle, right? Rats kitzvi, az kanamer, rats kitzvi. Why am I blanking on swift as an eagle? Somebody will remind me, I'm sure, in the chat.
Gibor Ka'ari.
The Gibor Ka'ari. What?
Gibor Ka'ari.
Gibor Ka'ari, I know, but swift as an eagle.
Nisher.
I should just look it up in Tanakh.
Kal Kanesher.
Kal Kanesher, thank you. Who said that? Thank you very much. Okay. Az kinamer kal kanesher rat kitzvi gibor ka'ari, to do the will of your Father in heaven. So you have these powerful animals, and you should be emulating them. We're going to come to the tzvi and the nesher a little later. I didn't include the leopard here, but interesting that we have a difference between the leopard and the lion. The leopard is az. He is chutzpahdik. He goes in places that others don't dare to go. But the lion has bravery, has gvura, and those are two different things. Somebody who's fascinated by this stuff, and if you're fascinated by this, you should totally visit his place. Rav Natan Slifkin, who has the museum, the Biblical Museum of Natural History, which is now in a beautiful new building, and he goes into all of these things in much greater detail. Very, very interesting place. But here we have our lion as one of the animals to emulate in your avodat Hashem, in how you serve God. Right? Another image is something that we have in the Navi Amos. Okay, Amos loves lions. Lions show up in a lot of his nivuah. Amos is he's not a shepherd, he's a noked, but he deals with flocks, and he's in the desert, on the edge of the desert. Last week we talked about the Sfar Hamidbar. Okay, he's on the edge of the desert near Tekoa, and it's very likely that he brings up lions because he sees lions, because they're there, because it's not a civilized place, and so a lion can come and to be there and not be frightened because there aren't people to scare him away. The picture that you're seeing here is a picture of the incredibly beautiful and deep Nachal Tekoa, Wadi Tekoa, right? This deep riverbed that runs all the way out to the Dead Sea, right? And we have this pasuk from Amos, Aryeh Sha'ag Milo Yira, Adonai Elohim Diber Milo Yira. A lion has roared, who can but fear? God has spoken, who can but prophecy? Aryeh Rotenberg, premier tour guide of Eretz Yehuda, explained to me once this idea. Why does he talk about a lion roaring and who wouldn't be afraid? He says, if you are in Nachal Tekoa, okay, and a lion roars, Nachal Tekoa is a deep canyon. One lion roaring, his roar echoes and bounces off the walls of the canyon. You have no idea where that lion is or even how many lions there are. It's incredibly terrifying, right? And Amos probably experienced this. So when he says Arishag Milo Yira, it really is a terrifying thing, particularly concerning the area where he is. The lion becomes the symbol for all different kinds of things. Gur Aryeh Yehuda, okay, we said Dan, but also Yehuda, because the lion is the symbol of Yehuda, he's also become the symbol of Yerushalayim, and he is the symbol of the Jewish people, and even beyond the Jewish people. So the picture that you have here on the left is a building in Jerusalem that belongs to the Ethiopian church. And on it, it has the Lion of Judah, because the Lion of Judah is also a symbol of the Ethiopian monarchy, because they believe that they are descended from King Solomon, i.e. Judah. They also see themselves, and the Ethiopian Jews say this as well, is descended from the tribe of Dan. So that same Dan, Yehuda, lions, they're all here. Okay? I particularly like this Jerusalem Trail lion. I like how he's carrying his little stick and his water bottle. And on the other side is the Rishut HaTeva, is the symbol, right on the far right, is the symbol of the national parks, which is an ibex that we are going to come to very soon. Okay, but first the tzvi. Okay, Hatzvi Yisrael. Okay, now tzvi is very interesting because if you look at old archaic translations of Tanakh, a tzvi is often translated as a deer. Okay, and this is one of the issues that we have with commentaries and translations that were done in Europe. Okay, where they were familiar with a different set of animals and a different set of plants. I'm always amazed at how much Rashi knows, and he never, left the area of Ashkenaz, but he still wasn't aware of animals that he'd never seen before. And the tzvi is one of those animals. So a tzvi is not a deer. Okay, I'm going to see the same issue with the nesher. A tzvi is a gazelle. It's part of the antelope family. Okay? It's very well known in Eretz Yisrael, so well known that it appears in mosaics. As you can see here, this is another picture from Ma'on, this beautiful tzvi here. And a tzvi has certain qualities that are very very well known. One is that he is fast, right? We saw a Ratz Kitzvi. In Sefer Shmuel, we hear about Yoav ben Tzruya's brother Atzael, who was so fast. He was also Ratz Kitzvi, and he thought nobody could catch him. And in the end, he was caught. But they can run 80 kilometers an hour. Okay. And they have to run because they were often hunted. They are actually kosher animals. And one of the reasons that they also are very close to extinction today, they're protected, but they were very close to extinction, is because they're herbivores. Their only defense is running away, and they are kosher, so people wanted to eat them. The other problem that they have is that they're losing their habitats. We'll come back to that in a second. But a tzvi is very fast. A tzvi is very beautiful. Okay, take a look at the second pasuk here from Shir Hashirim, from the Song of Songs. Barak dodi udmei lecha litzvi o laofer hayalim al harei b'samim. Right, it's two things here. It's also running away, but also beauty. Right, you're the dodi. The dod is so beautiful, like a gazelle. Okay. Or somebody so beautiful is kind of an archetype. And that's where we have from the very famous Kina, right? The lamentation that David says about Shaul and Yonatan, Hatzvi Yisrael al bamotecha halal. You're so beautiful. You're the glory of Israel. You're the beauty of Israel. But a tzvi also can be used as something special, as something choice. And that's where you have this great pasuk in Yechezkel. Vayomahu nasati yadi lahem lahotzi'am me'eretz Mitzrayim el eretz asher tarti lahem, right? A land which I had sought out for them. Zavat chalav udvash, milk and honey. Tzvi hi lechol ha'aratzot. It doesn't mean that Eretz Yisrael is a gazelle to all the other lands. It means that tzvi here is a metaphor for the most beautiful, the most wonderful. Chazal take this idea, by the way, and they say a tzvi is the kind of animal that you can really see its pounds, right? When it eats, its skin expands. And they say that Eretz Yisrael is the same. When we had few people, we weren't able to support so many, but as we have more and more people, we know that this is true, right? The British didn't think that Eretz Yisrael could support more than 1 million people. Today we have, thank God, 10 million and counting. And Eretz Yisrael is a tzvi in that sense, right? The other reason that the tzvi was disappearing, and it's still a problem today, is a loss of habitat. Right? Tzvi, the gazelles need areas, wild areas to run. One of the most famous examples of this is what's called Emek HaTzvaim. in Jerusalem. People who lived in Jerusalem, I remember 25 years ago, I lived in Jerusalem. We lived in Beit HaKerem, and there was this beautiful valley that you could cut through from Beit HaKerem to go to Hebrew University. And then they built the Begin Highway, which is a very useful highway, but it essentially destroyed this natural habitat of the gazelles. And what the city of Jerusalem did was they created a very beautiful park, right, called Emek HaTzvaim. But still, it's bounded by a highway. They can't go any further. So, and it means that, you know, herds can be separated from each other, the animals, and it's definitely a problem. So the tzvi, very hunted and also losing its habitat. We talked about the ibex. Let's talk about it a little bit more. For the ibex, and the hyrax, right? The Yael and the Shafan Sela, we are moving down south. Okay, we're moving down to the area of the Judean desert, of the Negev, of Mitzpe Ramon. And that's where we find these different animals. The Yael, right? Yael, the name comes from Yael, the creature, which is a much nicer name, I think, than ibex. Are amazing, amazing climbers. And this photograph is fabulous. Take a look at these guys. They're not just climbers, they're jumpers. Okay, so look how they can jump from rock to rock. And if you've ever gone hiking in Engedi or around Mitzpe Ramon, you've seen how they can go up to the top of the cliffs. They can just scramble up without any problem, scramble back down. And this is where we have Sefer Tehillim, right? Harim hagvohim laye'elim. Right, the high mountains are for wild goats. Slaim machaseh lashfanim. In Tehillim, they're putting these animals together because they really do go together. They live in the same place. The hyrax, or some people call them rock badgers, they hide in the slaim, the rocks, and the ye'elim are nearby on the mountains. And of course, we have the same thing when in Sefer Shmuel, in the story of Shaul chasing David to Engedi. Again, we hear by the rocks of the wild goats. Okay, so these guys are known to have lived in the desert 3,000 years ago and still today. However, ibexes also were becoming very close to extinction, and they became a protected species. Today, the Ye'elim, particularly in Engedi, also in Mitzpe Ramon, they feel so comfortable around people because they haven't been hunted for at least 50, 60 years, that if you go to Engedi and you go into the parking lot, you can sometimes see ibexes climbing on the cars. Right? If you go to Mitzpe Ramon and you stay in the beautiful Breshit Hotel, there are ibexes that come and drink from your swimming pool. Right? They are completely at home around people, which I suppose is good and bad. But they became really one of the first of the protected species, and that's why they became the symbol of the Nature and Parks Authority, which is what you see here on the right. So this is just a magnificent male Yael. I know, sounds strange, a male Yael, but there are with his horns, and this is a symbol of the national parks. Okay, from the beautiful to the destructive, we're going to talk about locusts, arbeh. Okay, we know of arbeh mostly from the story of the Exodus, right? It's one of the 10 plagues of Yetziat Mitzrayim, but we also hear about it in other places. Locusts, arbeh, are not grasshoppers. Okay, they're similar, but they're not the same. And the main feature of locusts that makes them so destructive is that they swarm. Okay, they can cover an area of 1,200 square kilometers. Okay, with 40 to 80 million locusts per square kilometers. I'm not going to do the math for you, but that's quite a lot of locusts, right? And they can travel vast distances. Each one can eat its weight in a day. So you can imagine that it would be very, very simple for locust swarm to land in a field and to just destroy it, decimate it completely in one day. We've had locust plagues in the past in Eretz Yisrael. In the pictures here on the left is a picture of, that's not leaves on a tree, that's locusts on a tree. Okay, this is the plague in 1915, which was a terrible, terrible thing. Mostly, not only, but in addition to the fact that World War I was terrible in the land of Israel. There was already famine, there was already disease, and then this locust plague came as well. People who were here last week, we talked about Aaron Aronson, who was part of Neely, but who also was a botanist, the discoverer of wild wheat, and he was called in by the Turks to help figure out how to get rid of the locusts. The picture on the right is of a locust swarm much more recently. This is probably from the 50s, from the 60s, from Kibbutz Saad. And we have locust swarms. The last one was a few years ago. Today, we have more ways of dealing with them, but they still can be incredibly destructive. The Navi, who's probably the most famous for talking about the locusts, is the Navi Yoel. And the first couple of prakim of Yoel is about locusts. Commentaries have disagreed. Is it really about a swarm of locusts, or is it a metaphor about the enemies of Am Yisrael? But he seems to have a lot of detail here, right? And we'll read this pasuk in Hebrew because each one is translated differently, but I'm going to translate it based on Yehuda Felix, the naturalist. Yeter hagazam achal ha'arbeh. Okay, we have arbeh. Yeter ha'arbeh achal hayalek. Right, yalek. V'yeter hayalek achal hachasil. Okay, so we really have 4 different permutations of locusts: gazam, arbeh, yalek, and chasil. Yehuda Felix defines them such in this way. He says the yalek is the larvae. It's milakek. It licks the plants. Okay, then it sheds its skin, and what grows next is called the chasil. Chasil bilashon lechasel. It devours everything. Okay, that's the young locust. It sheds its skin again, and it becomes a gazam, which has wings, and it eats bark, gezem. Okay? And finally, the mature locust is called an arbeh, and that lays the eggs, which is just as much of a problem as the original locust, because then it's just going to continue and continue, and you have to get rid of the eggs. So if you want to think of a metaphor for destruction, arbeh is an amazing metaphor. However, on the more positive side, okay, according to some traditions, arbeh are kosher and can be eaten. And this seems to be the next wave of dealing with food scarcity, is to eat insects. So yes, the arbeh is mentioned in Sefer Vayikra, right? We have this Vayikra 11:21. So we do have this definition of what it's supposed to look like, but really Jewish communities only ate locusts if they had a Mesorah about particular animals. Ashkenazim did not have this Mesorah. Famously, Yemenites did, and they ate them. Today, there are people who are trying to encourage this again. And if you go to the museum, Biblical Museum of Natural History, you can actually buy 100% whole dried kosher locust, delish, and try them for yourself. But again, Ashkenazi poskim, not so big on this, although that might change, who knows. Okay, if we're already in the kingdom of smaller creatures, let's talk for a minute about snails. Okay, the Torah tells us that tzitzit need to have a blue fringe, a ptil techelet. Okay, it does not tell us where that techelet comes from. The Gemara has a whole discussion, mostly in Menachot, about how to make this tchelet and how to differentiate the true tchelet from something they call kela ilan, which is a different kind of blue dye, indigo, which is not the true tchelet. The Gemara talks about achilazon, kind of a snail, and what you have to do with it and where it can be found and how you have to treat it and what you add to it. At some point in Jewish history, the tradition of how to make the tchelet was lost. Now, we know that there was a dyeing industry of making purple. Okay, Phoenicia is from the word purple in Greek. The Phoenicians in the north in Lebanon and all along the northern coast would take snails, murex snails. That's the picture that you see over here on the left, and they would make a kind of a purple dye. We have traces of this dye. We have remains of dyeing factories in a place called Tel Shikmona near Haifa. We have fabric that's made of this dye. We know about the purple. The question is the blue, right? How did you get the purple to be blue? And probably about 20, 25 years ago, there were a couple of scientists slash Talmidei Chachamim, Baruch Sturman, Ari Zivotofsky, I'm forgetting the last Ari, but he lives in my neighborhood. I should remember his name, right? And they figured out how to do this. And part of it was science, and part of it was something that's also important in science, and it was luck, right? Adding certain chemicals to the mix, but then by accident leaving it on a windowsill in the sun, and the sunlight proved to be the secret ingredient that turned the purple into the blue. And that's why today many people started wearing tchelet again and believe that this is really the true tchelet. So tchelet story is also a very interesting story. All right, let's go to Egypt for a few minutes. Egypt had a huge pantheon of gods, many of them from the animal kingdom. Okay, there were many animals that the Egyptians held to be sacred animals. And when we look at the story of the Exodus, and we look at the story of the Makot, and of Moshe and Aaron confronting Paro, so much of the hidden meaning of the story lies in understanding which animals were holy and were powerful for the Egyptians. So we'll start with the snakes. Okay, one of the most strongest images that we have in the story of Moshe and Paro is Moshe taking his mateh, his staff, right, throws it on the ground, and it becomes a snake. Then he picks it up, and it's not a snake anymore. Why a snake? I mean, it's a neat magic trick, but why a snake? Okay? Because cobra was a symbol of one of the powerful goddesses of Egypt, the goddess Wajet. She was the protector of Lower Egypt. If you were a pharaoh, on your crown, on your uraeus, you had an image of a cobra, because this cobra is a symbol of royalty, and it's also a symbol of protection. Okay? And if you are coming with your symbol of royalty, says God, Moshe is going to come with his symbol of royalty. A staff is a symbol of royalty, and a snake is also. And he has both. He has a staff that becomes a snake. So the cobra and Egypt are very, very connected. Snakes in general in Tanakh are considered to be very tricky, very dangerous. This starts already with one of the very first stories in Tanakh, the story of the Eitz Hadat, right, and the Nachash, and tricking Chava. And snakes are considered to be, in Chazal, a personification of the Yetzer Hara. They're considered to be extremely dangerous. So a snake has an important place in Tanakh, in Midrash, but also in our story with Egypt. Another important animal is the tanin, is the crocodile. Okay? Crocodiles are in the Nile. They were feared because they're terrifying, but they were also very venerated. Right? People made mummies for their crocodiles. Take a look at this picture on the right here. Okay? The crocodile god, okay, this one in the middle here, his name is Sobek. I know he looks a little like Lyle the crocodile for those who grew up on those books, but he was much scarier. Okay? Sobek is a crocodile god, and Paro is his incarnation. That's the picture over here on the left. And that's why in Sefer Yechezkel, right, God says, go to Paro Melech Mitzrayim, Hatanim Hagadol Harovetz Bitoch Ye'orav, the great crocodile sprawling in the Nile, who says, my Nile is my own, I made it for myself. Okay, so the crocodile is a god, but the crocodile is also the Paro, and the crocodile is also used. Aaron comes before Paro and before his magicians, and his mateh doesn't become a snake. What does it become? It becomes a tanin. Same idea. You think this is your protector, this is your symbol of royalty, of power. I have better than you. Okay. Finally, we could do more, but finally, Bnei Israel are told to take a lamb, right? They take a lamb on the 10th of Nisan. What's the big deal? It would not be right to do this. How can we sacrifice something that is untouchable to the Egyptians, right? It takes a lot of courage for Bnei Israel to take that seh and to tie it in front of their houses and then to sacrifice it. Why? Because another god is named Amun. He is a ram's head, okay? And to slaughter the image of this god, which is what Bnei Israel are doing, is a huge provocation to the Egyptians. So in the picture here, you have Amun in this picture on the left, actually protecting Paro. You can see the little Paro below the major, huge god. Over here on the right, you have Paro bringing food to the god Amun, right? Serving him. Okay? Finally, our last creature is a creature that's a very interesting enigma in Tanakh. And this idea comes from an Egyptian scholar named Garfinkel. I learned it from my neighbor, Dr. Benny Gesundheit, who's also an Egyptian scholar. Okay? And he says we have this strange verse in Sefer Shmot. And it says like this: when you come into the land, don't worry, says God, you'll be okay. ושלחתי את הצירעה לפניך, וגירשה את החיבי, את הכנעני, את החיתי מלפניך. I will send a tzir'ah. What's a tzir'ah? A hornet, a wasp. Why? What does that mean? Right? Rashi says it's some kind of a disease, it's going to kill people. It's a very strange choice of words until you take a look at ancient Egyptian representations of Egypt, okay, of Lower Egypt and royalty. And you see, you have a very nice sir'ah, a wasp, a hornet, a bee. It's not so clear, okay? But this is the symbol of Egypt. And Israel for sure would know that. They are coming from Egypt. They know this is a symbol of Egypt. So what does it mean, right? What does it mean? I'm going to send the Egyptians ahead of you. So if you know a little bit about, somebody needs to be muted. If you know a little bit about the history of Eretz Yisrael in the years before we come into the land, it's ruled over by the Egyptians. Paro Tutmos conquers most of the land of Canaan, and Egyptians rule over it kind of in absentia for a couple of centuries. There are Canaanite kings, but the Canaanite kings are very local, and they have to turn to the Egyptians for anything that they might need. And we have this great trove of letters, the Alamarna letters, where the king of Beit Dan or the king of Beit Shemesh or the king of Jerusalem, they're all writing their letters. Send us food, send us water, send us arms, send us soldiers. The Egyptians specifically weakened each one of these Canaanite kingdoms so that they wouldn't rise up against them. What happened? When Bnei Israel come out of the land of Egypt, there's a vacuum of power. We know that there's a collapse of power in Egypt after the Exodus. And when Bnei Israel come into the land of Canaan, the Egyptians are no longer ruling there. And the Canaanites have been so dysfunctional because they've relied on the Egyptians for everything that they can't unite to fight against the Israelites. And that's what it means. I sent the tzir'ah, I sent them to kind of break you apart, to get the land ready for the Israelites by breaking apart the Canaanites. And that's just an amazing image. Okay, we're going to leave Egypt, come back to Eretz Yisrael. If you asked most people who don't know anything about Israel, what's the one animal you're going to see in Israel? Camels, right? The truth is it's not so easy to see a camel until you go down deep into the Negev, or maybe if you hang out by like very touristy places. But camels are definitely a symbol of the Middle East and a symbol of Eretz Yisrael. Our camels are one-humped camels. They can withstand very harsh conditions. They can travel without water for up to 10 days. And so they are perfect for being desert animals. The camel is not a kosher animal, as we well know. It does chew its cud, but it doesn't have split hoofs. We have camels in lots of places, right? The camels are talked about in the stories of the Avot, most famously here in the story of, why am I flipping? Okay. Most famously, hold on. Sorry. My camera, come back.
We see the camel.
No, but do you see me? You don't see me, but you hear me, but that's okay.
We see a
That's
picture
the
of
main thing.
you lecturing people under
All
trees.
right. Why is my camera not working? All right, I'm not going to worry about it too much. All right, one more time. All right, I see you. That's what counts. Okay, we have camels in the stories of the Avot, most famously in the story of Eliezer and Rivka, right? Giving all those camels to drink. This is a bit of a controversial story. When did camels actually come to the land of Israel? When were they domesticated? Are the stories written later? It seems that camels could have come from other places. But I'm not going to get into this discussion right now. But we definitely know by the time of the Mishnah, we for sure have lots of camels in the land of Israel. And we hear about them in various places in the Mishnah. Okay, so I brought you two examples here. One is the Mishnah in Sukkah, right? Famous example, one who establishes his sukkah at the top of a tree or atop of a camel. The sukkah is fit, one may not ascend and enter it on the first festival day, right? Great example of camels in the public sphere in the time of the Mishnah. Okay, another great example, Bava Kama, the sixth parak. Okay, what do you have to worry about? Sorry. Okay, what do we have to worry about in Reshut HaBarbim, in public spaces? If you have a camel that is laden down with flax and it's passing through a public space, and this bundle of flax is so large that it goes into the stores. Remember, streets were more narrow in most places. Flax caught fire from a lamp in the store belonging to the storekeeper, and as a result of the burning flax, the camel set fire to the building. The owner of the camel is liable. Okay, so very interesting example. Camels, of course, are not kosher, therefore their milk is also not kosher. However, there's been a whole bunch of interesting developments around camel milk, which is supposed to be healthy for various kinds of diseases. And there even are some poskim, I believe, who will say that if it's for medicinal purposes, you could drink it. Don't quote me on that. Okay. Okay. An animal that is not exactly in our local scene, but was known about in the time of Chazal and even in the time of Tanakh, is an elephant. Okay. We have ivory in Eretz Yisrael. Okay. We found ivory in the wealthy houses of places like Shomron and Megiddo. They imported ivory. We know that King Solomon gets ivory from the Queen of Sheba. It's very much a luxury item, but it was around, it was known. Elephants were used in battle by the Greeks. Okay, they're very terrifying animals. Elephants appear in mosaics, sometimes lifelike, as you can see in this great mosaic from Lud on the right. Sometimes exactly lifelike, like in the mosaic on the left from Caesarea, where we're not 100% sure the artist saw an elephant, but elephants are known to Chazal. Now, probably the most famous example of an elephant in the Gemara, we have elephants that show up in dreams, but the best story about an elephant in the Gemara is in Kiddushin, Daf 25, where it talks about how do you acquire possession of a large animal like an elephant. And the Gemara says, using vines. And the Tosfot says, what does that mean, using vines? Rabbi Meshulam explained that you lift the vines in front of the elephant and it will jump to eat them, thereby lifting itself off of the ground. Elephants cannot jump. They are biologically unable to jump. A, because they're very, very heavy, and B, because their bones, as you can see in this great X-ray here, they're always standing on tiptoes, right? Think Barbie feet. That's what elephant feet are. And so they can't jump. Okay, so what is Rav Mishalom talking about? So rather than dismissing all of Tosfot and saying they didn't know anything, Europeans very, very, very rarely saw elephants. Okay, the Balei Tosfot in Ashkenaz of the 10th, 11th, 12th century, there's no way that they saw an elephant. Okay, it was a very, very rare sight in Europe. And Rav Mishalom assumed an elephant, like a horse, like a donkey, like a lion, like a leopard, can jump. Why shouldn't he assume it could jump? And he was incorrect. But it is a great example of elephants showing up in the Gemara. Okay. Oh, we have to talk a little faster. Okay. Doves and pigeons. Doves and pigeons. They are the same. I know we like to think of doves as beautiful and pigeons as dirty, but really they are part of the same family. It's called the Columbidae family of birds. They are used for sacrifices. There actually are two terms in the Torah, a tor and a ben yonah. So they're variations. A tor, according to Moshe Ra'anan, is a dove, and a ben yonah is a pigeon, but they're very, very closely related. Okay, these are animals that are great for sacrifices. They're also great for what we would call today a TV dinner. Okay, they are small enough that a small family can eat them. And in the days before refrigeration, that was all you could eat. You couldn't shecht a cow unless you were going to have 30 people over for dinner. So this is a very easy meal to have. And it's added to that doves and pigeons are monogamous and they always come home again. And so people built these things, which you're seeing here on the right. This is called the columbarium, which is essentially building nesting places for the doves to come. And then they stay there and they nest there. And then you can just take them whenever you need them. And you have very, very nice, easy dinner. Not to mention that you can also use their dung as fertilizer. So these were very, very useful animals. They were raised up until, they're still being raised today. But this is a dove cote from about 150 years ago. But they also were used in ancient times, but certainly in more modern times, as messengers. Okay, you can see this is a modern bird. That's just for an example, where you have this little tiny capsule attached to its leg. And we have messenger pigeons that were used in World War I by Neely. They were used in 1948 by Tzahal. This was definitely a way to get communications from one place to another. Okay, if we're talking about birds, Israel is one of the great migrating centers of the world. These are pictures from the Hula Valley. We get more than 500 million birds from 500 species pass through the land of Israel in migrating season. We're going to talk about the Hula Valley more next time, so I'm going to skip ahead to the eagle and the vulture. Okay, if you asked most people what is a nesher in English, they would say an eagle. This is very, very incorrect. Okay, again, in Europe, they had eagles, and an eagle was considered to be this noble, beautiful animal. And so a nesher, right? We have all these beautiful psukim about a nesher, like you have here, ve'esaitchem al kanfei nisharim. So an eagle was considered to be a nesher. But now that we are back in the land of Israel, we understand that a nesher is actually an equally majestic bird called a griffin vulture. Has an enormous wingspan, 2.5 meters wide wingspan, and it can fly incredibly high for incredible distances. We have this beautiful pasuk in Yeshayahu, Kovei Adonai yachlifu koach ya'alu ever kinisharim, right? They're going to go without, they don't lose their strength, they're going to go up high. Why did we not like to identify the nesher with the griffin vulture? Because people said vultures, carrion eaters, they're not majestic birds. But of course, vultures are very, very important in the whole ecosystem, and they are incredibly, incredibly beautiful birds. Okay, finally, for the 70th anniversary of Israel, we had contests to determine what are our national flowers, animals. So in case you didn't know, the national snake is this guy. He's called a Tsefa Yisraeli, a Palestinian viper. The national crab, you didn't know we had a national crab, is the common black scorpion, the Nouveau Yericho. The national dog is this guy, a Knaan dog, which you really can see everywhere. And the national bird is the duchifat, the hoopoe. Now, the hoopoe is distinguished because it's very interesting looking. However, it's not a very intelligent bird. It's not a very interesting bird, except for how it looks. If you ask me, I would choose the nesher, but nobody asked me. Okay, and finally, just the species that we hear about so much throughout Tanakh and in more recent times, sheep, goats in the landscape of the land of Israel. Okay, we have many things in the chat, so let's see if we can go through them all very quickly. All right, let's see. Cats are modest. Cats are modest. Come on, how they clean themselves, how they go to the bathroom in secret places. They're very modest. The statistics about the variety of birds do include the migratory species, correct. Okay, my middle name is Dove or Bear, yes. Hippopotami lived in the Hula Valley, which used to be a lake. Okay, also in like the Nachalim, I think in Nachal Taninim, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, according to Natan Slifkin, the animal mentioned in Tanakh most often is the lion. That also makes sense. Leopards are also very fast, as are cheetahs. Yes. Yeah. Oh, nice. Slifkin has recently discussed some of these animals and others he thinks couldn't have existed in Israel at the time, mentioned by rabbis who live in Europe. Okay, thank you, Irene. That sounds very interesting. Yeah, Eretz HaTzvi is exactly Tzvihi l'chol ha'aratzot. It's the same idea. Yeah, wildlife corridors. They do talk about this, and they have done it, I think, on Route 1. Yeah, it is an idea that is being used today. Ibex horns, right? Shofarot. I was going to talk about shofarot. I didn't. Chocolate covered. I assume you mean locusts and not ibex. If locusts destroy your food supply, what else can you eat? Right? Dye. The Phoenicians were the dyers, but there's actually was a very interesting study just very recently of this Tel Shikmona by Haifa, where it seems that the workers and the what we would call the technicians were Phoenicians, but the guys who ran it and who owned it were Israelites. I don't remember how they knew this, but this was part of the study. Ari Greenspan, thank you very much. The Egyptians didn't eat meat. Is that true, Ruth? The Egyptians were vegetarian? I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, they didn't eat meat. That was
They didn't eat meat at all? No kind of meat?
no, they worshiped the
I know, but they didn't eat
they
other
they
any kind of
hated
animals?
and they hated the herders. They just used the animals for plowing and for pulling their chariots, but they didn't eat it. No.
Okay. I will believe you. Okay. Jerusalem, it's cats. Yes, the symbol. Camel's milk for crones. Interesting. In Kiddushin, what is the word for elephant? Appeal. Appeal is the word the word that we hear both in Tanakh and in Torah Shebaal Peh. Circus animals stand on their rear legs. That's very nice. They don't jump. Standing on your rear legs is not the same as jumping. Okay, morning to right. There are different kinds of pigeons. What then is a gozal? A gozal or a gazelle? What are you asking, Ruth?
The gazelle, the birds, the birds that were not cut up in the
Gozal.
That
Oh, it's
weren't
a
they
gozal. It's a chick, I believe is how it's translated, although I could be wrong. But today we say gozal is a chick, like uf gozal. In Breshit, I would have to look. I don't remember. It will be homework. Okay, everybody. I'm sorry my camera died in the middle. But otherwise, thank you, everyone. Have a good and a safe week with many yeshuot for everyone.
Thank you.
Amen. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.